أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم من همزه ونفخه ونفثه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Okay, so today, inshallah, we're gonna go over. We're gonna finish up some of the things that we were talking about in terms of the capital T truths, but we're also gonna go into, inshallah, how to maintain growth and development and so on. So let's start by going over updates or reflections if you have any. If you have any thoughts or reflections or epiphanies that you've had, anything that you'd like to share, then this is the time you can do that, inshallah. And also in moving forward, we're gonna come up with another way to do this for those who are you know who have some things to share but would prefer that they are anonymous or so on. So we're gonna come up with some system, inshallah, to help with navigating that, inshallah, whether it's like an online form that you just fill out anonymously before the session so we can have an idea of what's going on, or another way that you guys can suggest. So inshallah, reach out to us if you have any thoughts. In the meantime, if anybody has anything to share now, then that would be great, inshallah. In the past recordings that we did, this is their homework review. We've talked about these things so far. Obviously, there's a lot more when it comes to capital T truths. The last thing that we talked about, we added last time, was sustainable growth, even if small, and that's the topic of today. How do we sustain our growth? How do we maintain the course, essentially, right? And then the all or nothing mindset is the thing that we want to avoid. So this is what we're going to be talking about, inshallah. If you have anything else to add on to this, if you've thought of something that you feel like we sort of get wrong in how we navigate things, then we can talk about it now, inshallah. So I'm going to get out of this really quick so I can type. So another thing that we could talk about over here is relationships and authority. And what I mean by that is sometimes we get these wrong. Okay. So the difference over here between the two, one of them is bounded or conditional relationships and authority. That is to say, for example, sometimes we feel like there is no checks and balances in the authority that we have, whether it's as parents, whether it's as older individuals relative to others. We have sometimes we feel like there's unbounded authority that we have, sort of like we have complete authority over somebody, right? But in reality, we don't have that. In reality, even parents, for example, although they have authority over us, even or over our kids, if you're a parent, right? So even then, there is a sort of condition attached to it. If, for example, parents tell you to do something haram, then you don't have to listen to them, right? If they tell you to do something that's zulm, for example, you don't listen to them. So this is the same thing that happens if an older person tells you to do something like that. This is the same thing that happens if your leader, right, tells you to do the same thing. There are many examples of this. One of them is when the Prophet ﷺ dispatched a group of people and he appointed an emir among them, a leader among them. And what happened is when this emir was going, when they went to wherever they were, the emir was sort of annoyed by what his people were doing, or there was a dispute, and the emir decided. He said that okay. He asked the people, "Am I appointed by the Prophet ﷺ over you guys that you have to listen to me and so on?" The people said yes. He said, "Okay, go ahead and get some wood." So they got some wood. They gathered it together. And he said, "Okay, now light a fire." So they lit a fire, and then he said, "Get in the fire." And they were like, "What?" So they didn't get in the fire. And then afterwards, when they came back, they addressed this with the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ addressed, and he responded, and he said, if they had gone in the fire, they would have been in the fire. As in, you don't obey a person in disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The authority a person has over you is only designated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not intend harm from people, for people, right? And so the idea is that we don't do things that are harmful. We don't do things that are, that's considered dhulm. We don't do these kinds of things. And if a person tells you to do them, you don't do them. You don't listen to that person. Prophet ﷺ, in one of the hadith from the, that it's also used as evidence for a maxim that the scholars have used, right? It's that we don't harm and we don't reciprocate harm. So, for example, if somebody finds an opportunity to harm another person, right, just out of the blue, or there's no attached reason and stuff, then that's not allowed in Islam. That's why in the ayah it says وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَدْعُونَ مَعَ اللَّهِ إِلَهًا آخَرَ وَلَا يَقْتُلُونَ النَّفْسَ الَّتِي حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ وَلَا يَزْنُونَ, and so on. That even when it comes to killing, that's not allowed unless there's a reason attached to it. For example, in the case of equal compensation, retribution, when it comes to killing, if somebody murders your family member or something like that, then you have the right, as part of justice, equal, you have the right for taking that person's life, in the sense that the court would then administer the death penalty and so on, right? So that's allowed in Islam. Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions, فَمَنْ تَصَدَّقَ بِهِ فَهُوَ كَفَارَةٌ, that whoever forgoes that, then this is better for that person. In other words, it's supposed to purify you. If you forgive somebody, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is gonna forgive you, right? And this is something that we also know from Surah An-Nur, when the Prophet ﷺ's wife Aisha, our mother Aisha radiallahu anha, when she was accused of the sin that she didn't commit, radiallahu anha, and Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he had a relative that he used to sponsor in terms of giving him money and so on, taking care of him and so on, and he became part of this ifk, this big slander that was against Aisha radiallahu anha, and that she was innocent. And then what happens is that this person, the Prophet ﷺ, this person, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, stopped sponsoring him. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then mentioned in the ayah, أَلَا تُحِبُّونَ أَنْ يَغْفِرَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ, wouldn't you like that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives you, right? So the idea was with this that that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that you should forgive, because wouldn't you wish that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives you too? As in, pretty much when you forgive others, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also going to forgive you. As in, you don't exact revenge from them, or you don't get retribution equal, you sort of forgo that. But if you do that, if you do get revenge equally, right, as in if the person did something, you do equal in return, under the system of law, right, then in that case that's okay. But it's better to forgo that, better to forgive, because it's also an expiation for you in terms of what sins you've done and stuff, right? And if you don't do that, then it's okay. That's also possible, because that's something that sometimes you're not going to be able to do. You're not going to be able to just forgive somebody without getting some sort of retribution and so on. So but it is definitely better, inshallah, that if you forgo that, if you're able to, then that's better, inshallah. So the idea over here, what I was trying to say, is that sometimes we have this unconditional surrender sort of mindset when it comes to being as parents. We want our kids to do everything that we want them to do, and no, they can't resist us, right? And that's it. Sometimes we even become so picky that we get into sometimes we get so picky about things where even if they are not aligning with Islam, we still force them upon them, right, on our kids. For example, we want them to get married to only certain people and not allowed to get married to anybody else for no other reason except because we don't feel like them that they should marry somebody else. That's it, right? There's no Islamic reason behind it or anything like that, no justified reason from an Islamic perspective. We just feel like this person shouldn't get married to that person, right? And so we sort of become really restrictive on that. Or we want them to do a very particular degree and no other degree. That's it. Like we want them to become, let's say, the stereotypical doctor, engineer, lawyer, for theses, for example. This idea that this is how it must be and stuff, right? And again, obviously, this is not to say that everyone is doing this, but I'm just making a point that sometimes it becomes we sort of adopt this mindset that we have unbounded, complete authority over people. but we don't have that. Islamically, there's conditional authority. When it comes to relationships, it's the same thing. There's conditions attached to it, and somebody could violate one of those conditions and therefore lose authority. For example, in the case of marriage, where a guardian for a woman, if he is being extremely restrictive and he's not taking care of the interests of the woman, he's not, whatever actions he's taken, for example, is not in the best interest of the woman, he can lose his guardianship over the woman and somebody else in line can get that authority. Or even to the point that local imam, for example, or like a leader of a country, like a Muslim country or whatever, can eventually get that guardianship, because the interests of a woman must be served in the case of a marriage, and if that's not there, then the guardianship was lost by the one who was originally designated that, right? So these are things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in the system so that people are not oppressed. And if somebody's rights are being taken away, somebody else can fulfill that right without the first person being able to get access to that person, right? In other words, if somebody is oppressing somebody, then other people can intervene and are supposed to intervene to stop that oppression. And we know that from the Prophet ﷺ mentioning, help your brother, whether he's the mazlum or the zalim, right? Whether he's the one that's the oppressed or the oppressor. So they asked the Prophet ﷺ, how do we oppress? We understand when it comes to the case of an oppressed person, but how do we handle the situation of a person who is the oppressor? And so he said, stop him from oppressing, right? So we have all these hadith and ayat and stuff like that of conditional authority and all that, but sometimes we sort of adopt the I have full complete authority over you and you can't do anything about it, right? And then we sort of propagate zulm, oppression, because of that, right? The Prophet ﷺ mentions that whoever man lam yarham saghirana, whoever does not show mercy to our young ones, wa ya'rif haqqa kabirina, and doesn't know or doesn't know or understand the rights of our elders, فَلَيْسَ مِنَّا, then that person is not from among us. So we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designated checks and balances in our context. Another hadith that goes like this, similar to it, كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ, that all of you are shepherds, right? And every one of you is going to be and every one of you is going to be asked about or questioned about his flock, right? That's you can translate it like that. That each of you is a shepherd, and each of you is going to be accountable or asked about his flock, right? So in other words, and then the hadith continues onwards and mentions about how a husband is responsible for his family, and that the emir of a land over whatever is responsible for all the people therein and so on. So this authority, this power that a person has, is more a situation of responsibility, where you're responsible for the affairs of other people, so therefore you're accountable for those things, as opposed to feeling like you could do whatever it is that you want to, and so, right? So this is like what Spider-Man says, I think it's with great power comes great responsibility. I think that's what he says, right? So this idea of you have power, but that power is only to facilitate the overseeing of the affairs of other people. It's not to be violated and so on. Like, you're given authority because it facilitates carrying the responsibilities. That responsibility that you're given can be more easily managed. You're able to handle it better. You're able to do the things that you're supposed to when you have some authority. But the first thing is that you have some responsibilities over people, and then because of that, because you have a need, which is the need of having authority so that you can actually do the things that are necessary to be done, that's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you some authority. It's not the other way around, where you have authority and then you get responsibility necessarily. It's because you have some responsibilities that you get authority as a consequence of that, or as part of that process. So this is something that we a lot of times forget about, and then we propagate a lot of dhulm. Now, I work with individuals where like, we have a lot of cases coming up. I have a team of people that I work with, and we have a lot of cases that come up. And among the cases, one of the things that we realize is that people are sort of taking advantage of the authority that they have, but they consider it as unbounded authority, that they don't need to do anything, they don't need to optimize their own interactions. They just feel like Allah gave them this, authority as parents, as people that have some authority in other contexts and so on, right? And so they sort of violate that by just oppressing their constituents, let's say, right? The people that are below them or under their responsibility. And that becomes a problem because, obviously that, like, people don't like to be in a state of zulm. But for example, I was working with recently in a case where there was a sister, there was a lady, and she was having some difficulty with like getting married and stuff because her parents were sort of making her get married to like a very specific type of personality, right? And like this person needed to have certain credentials. They were looking for something very specific, and so she tried to go along with it and stuff. Tried to find somebody that she could find compatibility with and stuff, but it wasn't working out. And the person that she did want to get married to didn't have some of those credentials, but this person was a really kind person. He had a business that he's running and stuff and so on. So he has like money and he has not that's not an issue. He has good character. He has all these things and stuff, right? But he just didn't have like like a very specific degree that they were looking for. They were looking for a doctor specifically. They were looking for an engineer specifically, or a lawyer specifically. And the idea and apparently like the father wanting to make it so that other people would know about the status. Like he was telling her, well, what am I gonna tell other people? Like my daughter is married to like who, right? Like a business owner, or like the person who owns this business, as opposed to like a doctor, engineer, or lawyer. So apparently he like vocalized this too, right, to her. So it was clear that their intentions were just for the idea of what people are gonna think about it, as opposed to who's actually better for that person. So we explained to the lady, that okay, um, we're gonna try your best and stuff like that. If you just can't find somebody, if that person is not being compatible and stuff, then it's okay, because other interventions can be taking place. You're not stuck between a rock and a hard place, essentially, right? That you have some flexibility in this, and a person who's not looking out for your best interest, then that person can lose their guardianship and it can go to the next person in line, the next mahram in line, and then it can go to the third person and so on if that person isn't doing it and so on. And if necessary, others like the imam, for example, can take over, right? Now, this is not to say that kids should not listen to their parents, right? But it is to say that in those cases where such zulm is being propagated, that interventions can be taking place. And when that intervention comes in, then that's that. So a person shouldn't feel like they can just sort of control other people's not like lives and narratives and so on. That they should understand that there are safety nets in place for everyone that's involved, right? So keep that in mind, that this is how it is. So again, when there is a zulm being propagated, or when there is like haram stuff being commanded, then there is no obedience in the case of disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who authorized the authority that a person has over another person. So if you break the law, or if you break the trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, right, and you ask somebody to do something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want you to do, right? If you ask somebody to do something haram, then you're asking that person to disobey Allah. And if I apply that rule across the board, then that means that I would also have to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of in terms of accepting your authority over me. So I hope that made sense. That if you're telling me to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you're also telling me that essentially if I apply that rule across the board, then I would also have to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of your authority over me, right? And so you have to accept that full package. You can't just pick and choose and stuff. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is gonna your responsibility is going to be taken, or your authority is going to be taken away in the case of zulm, or making somebody do something haram and stuff. So keep this in mind, because this is from the context of Islam, and this is what the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, that there is no obedience in the case of disobedience. So this is something that also causes a lot of issues in our lives. So parents should understand that if they are going to be like that with their kids, then they lose their authority. And kids need to understand among themselves that if they are like this with their, for example, younger siblings, then they lose their authority. If you're like a owner of a company and you have employees and stuff like that, or if you're like a leader, you're appointed as like a leader in like a masjid, for example, or like or another organization and stuff, then your things that you would do, Islamically speaking, um, if you're doing things that is propagating oppression, or taking people's rights essentially, right? Or you're making somebody do haram stuff, as in like you're telling people to do something that's not right from Allah Ta'ala's perspective, then in that case your authority is taken away, and the people have no duty necessarily to listen to you. Now, there's also tact involved here, because sometimes if you might not agree with somebody in terms of what's right and wrong and stuff, and then you just sort of like rebel against that person, and then that causes a lot of problems and issues and stuff. So in a larger setting, in the case of like Islamic State, for example, the unity is more important than other things and stuff, right? So that's why the Prophet ﷺ discouraged people to rebel against their leader, because it can cause a lot of corruption, and it can cause a lot of um, bloodshed, and it can cause a lot of instability in the people's security, people's safety, and people's uh, like food and all that stuff can be something that can be taken out, right? And like, for example, health services that they might have if they're sick, for example, if they need medical attention and so on. If there is no stability, no structure and stuff like that, then that stuff can be taken away. So the harm in that case is a lot more complicated and sophisticated, which is why the Prophet ﷺ described that. But in smaller cases, when that is not likely to be the case and stuff, right, then in that case, it's a different scenario. So for example, at home, um, generally speaking, if everything else is going fine, but one thing is where you're just not, whatever, or in an organization, for example, everything is fine and stuff except the one thing and stuff, right? And that's the only thing that you're sort of like not really accepting. So you've taken the proper channels to address it and stuff. You've complained and stuff. You did whatever and stuff. You filed complaints or whatever, but things are not happening and stuff. So those are different contexts, right? So just understand that there is tact involved to it too. So with that, let's go to, if you don't have anything else you want to add on to this list, I'll also give you that for homework, inshallah, because I want you to constantly keep an eye out on what the capital T truths are from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala and the small T truths are, right? Just one more thing about this lady that we were talking about. This person, after we spoke with her and we gave her some like evidence from the Quran and the Sunnah and so on, we mentioned and we asked her how she feels now. She said, before, I was thinking that like I hear all the time and stuff that if you don't listen to your parents and stuff, that this is like doom and destruction and stuff, right? So she was feeling that this is like pervasive across the board and stuff. No matter what happens and stuff, no matter what they tell you, you just have to have absolute obedience and submission to them and stuff, right? And so she was like, after we explained to her that there are some exceptions to that rule. And again, exceptions are not the rule, right? So just keep that in mind, that I'm not advocating for exceptions becoming the rule. I'm just saying that there are exceptions case by case. And so that's a very important point over here, that it's not just unconditional, like you don't have to listen to them and stuff, right? So that's not what I want that to be clear, in case somebody tries to bring that up. So when we addressed this, she felt like, I feel better now because it makes sense. Like I'm not feeling like sort of like suffocated and stuff. I don't feel like I don't have any like options and stuff. I just have to do this, whether it's good for me, whether it's not good for me, whether I'm going to be happy at the end or I'm not going to be happy at the end. Like these are things that it sort of like made it easy for her to navigate that situation. So she found like sort of like a light at the end of the tunnel, essentially, right? So understand that this is like what Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala intended. He didn't intend for us to have zulm and oppression and stress and like negativity and stuff. That wasn't the end objective over here. The objective was for people to live in happiness and harmony and contentment and so on. And that cannot happen when the zulm is being propagated or haram stuff is being pushed forward and stuff and so on. So then in those cases, the exceptions are granted. Okay, so the next thing is, we talked about this already. I'm going to use this as a reminder. And again, this is from that same course that I was talking about. So this is not my information here. This is I'm using that from that course, and I'm going to have that cited over here. This is the source right here. So let's go with this. inshallah, and then we're going to go to the next one. So this right here is the state in, we talked about motivation, we talked about discipline, so you can kind of sort of look over it. Just remember that autonomy, we talked about having some choices as opposed to being restricted, right? Like being able to choose between, let's say, two options, right? As opposed to being stuck with one, and that's it. For example, when we pray, we have the option of, let's say, after Surah Al-Fatiha, we can recite Surah Al-Ikhlas, for example, or if you feel like it, you can recite Surah Al-Baqarah, right? Whatever it is that you want to recite, that you have the choice. And then having full command or understanding, when you know how to pray, for example, then you feel like you can pray. But if it's the first time you're praying, it's going to become really daunting. So a lot of people, when reverts, they want to learn how to pray. Um, for them, it's a daunting experience many times. So Islam helps you break it down and stuff like that. And I want you to remember this word, breaking down, right? Or this concept of breaking down. So that's a key word that we're going to talk about inshallah later. And then the purpose attached to something is going to help you in terms of motivation. And let's kind of sort of like I'm going to give you like a a heads up that I want you to keep in mind. Attach whatever you're doing to something bigger, something more meaningful to you, right? So always align like that, because then it's going to be something that's going to help you stay motivated. But if you're doing things that are disconnected from the things that you really like in life, that you really want in life, your end goals or your objectives, your vision in life, right? Then you're not going to be able to sustain that. And that's the concept of sustainability, right? And then this is what we were talking about in terms of discipline. So discipline is this thing that you constantly evaluate yourself. You constantly evaluate the feedback that you're getting, sort of analyzing what you're doing. Is it helping me get to where I want to get to, or is it not? And if it's not helping me, what can I tweak so I can or optimize or adjust so that I can continue moving forward, right, towards my goal, that I can actually continuously make progress as opposed to become stagnant or get off track, right? So these are the two things that we were talking about before, but I'm connecting them over here, and there's a reason. Obviously, I mentioned it in the past, and I'm reviewing it again today. So the next thing was flow. Now we didn't talk about flow before, but this is something that it's mentioned again in the context of being able to consistently do something, feeling like you're immersed in an activity. I'm going to give you a second to sort of skim through it, right? And obviously, you're going to have this in the recording, so you can see that later on as well, inshallah. But just skim through this right now. Take a minute to just sort of just get the gist of the idea over here. So flow is this mindset. There's this state of being, for example, not just mindset, but a state of being where you're so focused in an activity, you're so immersed into it that you sort of lose sight of, or you sort of lose yourself in it. And lose yourself in it meaning you're like, time goes by and you don't realize that time is going by. You're sort of like forget about time, right? For example, you might be watching a movie or you might be playing a sport and time is flying by and you're just not even feeling time is going by, right? You're so immersed into this, it's sort of like you're disconnected from time and the perception of time, right? And that's that. You're also feeling sort of like you're sort of immersed in this action that you're not thinking of anything else outside of that. Like, let's say you're playing sports, you're watching a movie, you're occupied with spending time with your friends, for example, and time is just flying by and you're like, oh, everything that you're doing, you're not thinking about anything else. You're not thinking about where you have to go after this. You're not thinking about like what responsibilities that you have to take care of for tomorrow or whatever and stuff, right? You're in the moment, you're living the moment, you're experiencing it, you're just immersed into it, and that's that, right? Also, there's another element over here, and that is that you feel that whatever you're doing, right, is challenging enough that you're not bored, but at the same time, it's not so challenging that you sort of feel like overwhelmed and you can't do it, right? So later on, we're going to see that it's called channel, like a flow channel. You're in this channel, this like sort of like the minimum and maximum, sort of like within that minimum and maximum range, and that's where the channel is. So the minimum is that it meets the minimum threshold below which you're going to feel bored, but above which you're sort of in the zone, sort of, right? And then the maximum threshold is like when you get into it, where above that is where you're going to feel overwhelmed, but below that you're still in the zone, right? So that's the minimum and maximum threshold. So that's what it means when we talk about feeling that you have control over a situation. It's challenging enough that it keeps your interest and it keeps you going and stuff, right? But it's not too little or too much that either bores you or it overwhelms you, respectively. And then the activity that you're doing, you're not doing it because it's like you're getting external reward for it, but it's just the activity itself, like spending time with your friends, right? That in itself is rewarding. You don't need like somebody to entice you towards it. When people go to Jumu'ah, for example, nobody's paying them to come in like large numbers to the masjid, right? Nobody pays people to come to the Jumu'ah. In fact, people sort of go out of their way to get like maybe like an extra time off, maybe half an hour compared to like the regular 1 hour. They might get an hour and a half break and stuff, and they might arrange all these things and stuff, and they might like do extra things and stuff just so that they can get to Jama'ah every single day, right? So why do they do that? What's the point? Like, I mean, they're not getting any money out of it. They're not getting any kind of like fame and anything like that. They're not also getting it to speak to people when they get there, because they just go there, literally just sit down quietly because you're not allowed to speak or move around or whatever and stuff. So that's all they're doing. They're just sitting there, and that's what they're doing, right? When it comes to Tarawih, for example, it's once a year, and the people come in like large numbers and stuff like that. The masajid get filled up and stuff, right? But they're not getting any sweets out of it and stuff, right? They're not getting any money out of it. They're not getting anything. They just come there, and they have to stand like long, standing during the Tarawih, but they still do it. Right? Why are they putting themselves through this? Because the action of doing it in itself is rewarding for them, right? So understand that over here, there's another thing I was trying to imply, that there is some good in people where they naturally want to do things, right? That helps them sort of flow, right? And sometimes we forget that when we say like Muslims are like terrible and stuff, and Muslims are not this and this, and they're not praying, whatever. But we realize we sort of ignore what's right in front of our faces, and that is that people still come to Jumu'ah, don't they? People still come to Tarawih, don't they? People come in large numbers on the day of Eid, for example, and they don't know how, like most of the people that are there, but they still come in these large numbers and stuff, right? What is it that drives them to come to these things? What is it that like makes them go there? For example, in the case of Jumu'ah and Tarawih, they're doing extra work. They're standing longer, in Tarawih than they would regular salawat and stuff, right? But they're still saying, no, I have to do this, I have to do this and stuff, right? So they have this intrinsic motivation to do things that are beneficial to them from an Islamic perspective, as things that are more pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. On the 27th night, for example, people, they come in larger numbers and stuff in Ramadan, thinking that it might be Laylatul Qadr, for example. So they come on those nights because they're thinking there's going to be extra reward or whatever and stuff. So there's something that intrinsically motivates them, that the experience and stuff is a reward, or the activity, the experience of the activity is the reward itself. But they're not looking for anything outside of that, right? As in, they come there because they know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to take care of it, whatever, and they're enjoying that experience because they're coming there, right? And that's it. So now I do want to like this sort of differentiate between these two. There might be like an extrinsic reward that you might say that is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So that's true, but it's not an immediate reward. It's something that you're sort of hoping for from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the end of the day, right? But so that's why I'm saying it's more, you can consider that as more intrinsic, right? Because you're not actually getting something immediately when you're doing it. But when it comes to like going to work, for example, you know that at the end of like the week or 2 weeks and stuff, you're going to get the paycheck and stuff, and that's why you're doing it. If had it not been for that, you wouldn't do it, right? But a lot of people, when they come and they make dua, for example, they're expecting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to listen to them, and they feel like there's some connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they have. So you'll see people crying, for example, you see people asking for forgiveness and stuff. So that's why I mean that there's a difference between the two, right? Okay, so now that's leading into the flow channel. So the flow channel is, like we were describing, it's that that area between the minimum and maximum, the threshold between them, and that's something to keep in mind, that that's where you want yourself to be when you're pursuing goals and objectives and so on. That's where you want to be in, because if you go below that, you're gonna sort of give up because you're bored, and if it's too much, too difficult, then you're gonna give up because it's too challenging and stuff, and it's overwhelming, so you can't take it, so you just sort of give up and stuff, right? And that's what happens when we look at goals that we want to achieve, but we feel like they're either too easy or too difficult. In the context of memorizing Quran, or learning Deen, or becoming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, or being able to pray at night, for example, or being able to fast more than just Ramadan, for example. These are things that a lot of times we sort of um, look at as one chunk, or if somebody wants to learn Arabic, for example. So we a lot of times look at it as one big chunk that we need to do all or none, right? And that's what I had before in the previous slides when I mentioned this right here, the all or nothing growth mindset, right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants it instead to be sustainable growth, even if it's small, right? So the idea is that we sometimes look at something and say, like, if I can't do this right now all at once, I'm not going to do it at all. So that's like you getting overwhelmed, and that's you going above the maximum threshold. In other words, you consider the task that you took on so difficult that you just sort of give up, right? I just can't do this and stuff, right? But had you broken it down into chunks, right? And remember the keyword chunk. Had you broken it down into chunks, you would have been able to achieve the goal by taking it one step at a time, one chunk at a time, one drop at a time, right? So that's the idea over here. So the flow channel is where you're sort of in between the minimum and maximum. So you're constantly motivated. You're never feeling too overwhelmed and so on. So the idea again, one must, I'm going to read that out, one must have a good balance between the perceived challenges. Remember we talked about perceptions, the small t, the truth, and then the capital T truth. So in this case, our perception of what the challenge looks like, right, compared to the skills that we perceive that we have. If they match, right, then that's good to go, and we feel confident, we feel that we can handle the situation. If what we perceive of a challenge is too much, right, and we feel that our skill set is not sufficient to address that challenge, we're going to sort of give up, right? So what's a tactic in terms of sustainability that what's a way to sort of navigate that, is to take that perceived challenge that is seeming to be more than our perceived skills, and then breaking it into chunks. So then each chunk is something that I perceive as something that I'm capable of doing, as in it matches my perceived skills, right? So I divide it up into small enough segments, or large enough segments, how you want to think about it, that it matches my perceived skill, or the skill set, right? So that's important over here. If you feel then it matches your perceived skill set, it's sort of falling in between the minimum and maximum threshold, then you're going to be more likely to continue and feel like you're going to be able to do it. And this goes back to the idea of motivation and the concept of mastery within motivation. So I hope that made sense. One more thing is the immediate feedback. This is important, and this is again a very important thing when it came to discipline. But the idea of immediate feedback, what that means is, as I'm doing something, I need to be able to sort of analyze my progress. I need to be able to sort of adjust as necessary. If I feel like, man, this is too much, I don't think I'm going to be able to sustain this, it's okay, break it down even more, right? So for example, if let's say that you were trying to read the Quran, right, and you wanted to, you had this thought that, I can do 5 pages a day, right? I can definitely do 5 pages a day. So your perceived skill set was equivalent to your perceived challenge of five pages a day. But then you sat down and you started actually reading it, and you realize that, it's taking, like, it's really difficult. Like, I'm fighting myself to just get through, like, the 4 pages and stuff, that before I can even get to the 5th page. So I don't think I'm going to be able to sustain this, because I'm going to get demotivated, because I'm not really, like, I'm not in the zone when I'm going to the 5 pages, right? That's just kind of pushing it a little bit. So then you say, okay, no problem. Let me cut it down to 4 pages, right? Or let me cut it down to even 3 pages, because I don't want to be, like, too close to my maximum, because I can burn out easily. And I don't want to be too close to my minimum either. But instead of going to, like, 5 pages, because that was beyond my maximum, and 4 might be too close to my maximum, maybe I can try 3. And it's better for me to do 3, because I can maintain that and then add on another page later on, so that I can get to my 4, right? When I'm sort of building up my momentum and so on, I can get to the 4. And we're going to talk about that in a second, inshallah, as well. So immediate feedback is very important. And again, obviously, you need to have a very clear set of goals and an idea of, like, what progress looks like. Because if you don't have clear goals, a clear end vision, then you're not going to be able to continue forward and stuff, right? You're not going to be able to go anywhere. So I sort of went backwards here, but it's okay. You understand the point that you need to know where you're headed before you can go there, before you can take your first step. If you don't know where you're going, let's say, for example, I leave the masjid, and I'm with a group of people, and we're like, you know what, let's go to, I don't know, like let's go to um, I want to come up with like a place that people haven't gone to, but let's just say that I want to go to Nebraska, right? So I leave the masjid. I haven't looked at where north, south, east, and west are, and I just say, you know what? Let's just go this way, and I just point to an arbitrary direction, and then we start going in that way, right? And then as I'm going there, I have no idea if I'm actually getting to my direction in my end destination or not. So in here, what I missed out on is I had a sort of understanding of where I wanted to go to, but I didn't really investigate what that looks like. How do I know if I got there or not, right? And I also don't know how I'm gonna get there. Like, I have no system, no plan in place. I just arbitrarily took a path and stuff, right? So a lot of times we do that. A lot of times we have a lot of goals in life, but we sort of don't really map out how we're gonna get there. We sort of assume that things are just gonna fall in place and stuff, right? Or a lot of times we might not even have a goal in life. Like, maybe I'm sitting over here in this webinar, and I have no idea of what I want to do in the next 5 years, or the next year, or the next month, or the next week even, right? I'm sort of going as things kind of come along and stuff, right? So in that case, my life is really arbitrary. I could be walking back and forth, left to right and stuff, without actually moving anywhere, right? Um, I might not even have a goal. If I don't have a goal in life, then I cannot ever go to closer to that goal, because you can't go closer to something that doesn't exist, right? And then obviously I can't measure progress, because I don't have a goal. I'm not going towards it and stuff. So I can't figure out how close I am or how far away I am relative to that goal, right? So I need to have point A and point B mapped out, and I need to figure out a pathway going from A to B. And without those, I'm not going to be able to get to point B, because either it might not exist, or I have no system in place to help me get there. Like, if I want to go to Wilmington Beach from Raleigh, North Carolina, I'm not going to be able to unless I know which direction to take, which route to take and stuff, and then kind of like taking the means towards the end. So that's important. And then obviously you need to constantly have feedback. Like, your GPS constantly tells you, okay, stay in the left lane, or stay here, whatever. It'll keep giving you instructions, because that's how the GPS is working. It's seeing where you are relative to the path that you're supposed to take. And then if you sort of go off track, it'll say, how they say, it's rerouting or recalculating or whatever and stuff, because it's saying, okay, wait, you're off track, let's get back on track. So it helps you get back on track. So that's immediate feedback. That's what it means, right? It's not delayed that you figure it out after after much time or distance has passed or whatever, and then you're like, oh wait, I just realized I'm going the wrong direction. You have to get immediate feedback of everything that's working, that's not working, if you're going in the right direction or not and stuff, all that. And then obviously the perception of the difficulty of the task versus um, the skill set that you have. Okay, now sustainable growth. What are the steps in this? So step number one is that you need to have small goals, meaning you chunk, right? Chunking is very important. You're not if you intend to lose weight, or if you want to gain muscle, for example, that's not going to happen overnight. That you have to understand that you have to take individual steps. For if you want to gain weight, if you want to, for example, if you want to build muscle, then you understand that it's going to be like ounce by ounce. It's not going to be like 10 pounds by every day or something like that. It's going to take some time to build up, but it's okay, because you're breaking it down to small chunks. Every day that you hit your goal, that small goal, you're going to feel high confidence. You're going to be like, wow, I achieved my goal. Now this first one is saying use small goals that carry high confidence levels. In other words, you feel like you're able to do these, number one, but also when you do them, you feel really good that you've accomplished this thing and stuff, right? So it's something that's a small goal, but as you finish it, right? First of all, it's a small goal that you feel like you can master it. It was challenging enough that you felt like you can do it. But at the same time, when you did it, you felt like this boost, right? Of this boost of motivation, essentially, right? And then that's gonna help you the next day around, because when you do it again, you already have the accumulation of the motivation from the day before, and then it helps you do the next thing. But then now you have that motivation of the 2 days added together, right, to do for the third day. And then when you do that, that's when you have enough to you have 3 days worth of motivation accumulated and stuff, right? And that's, if you noticed at the end of step 3, I made that note over there, right? So the accumulation of motivation, sort of. There was a person um, many years ago. I think it was like nearly like maybe like 10 years ago or something like that. Somebody sent me an article about this person who like does these competitions and stuff where he just kind of like, I think he was like many hours and stuff on the treadmill, like just running and running and running and running and running. And so people asked like, how is he able to do like these like these feats essentially, right? How is he able to break these records? And he said that the way I do it is like everything that I do, he pretty much considered everything that he did as small goals, that when he did them, he felt sort of achievement, like I've achieved this particular thing, right? I completed this task that I had, so I have an achievement now, right? And he considered these as achievements as a source of motivation. So the more achievements that he had sort of under his belt, that the more he felt like his glass of motivation was getting filled up, right? So then he was able to do larger goals. So for example, if he had a task in mind, for example, and he sort of put these tasks in mind, or sorry, he sort of assigned himself these tasks, knowing that they're going to have this motivational component to it. So even tying his shoelaces, for example, was a task that if he did, he sort of like checked, put a check mark next to that task list, or that task on the task list, and then he would feel motivated. He was like, he feels like he achieved something. He had a task that he needed to accomplish, and he accomplished it. So if you have a to-do list, for example, every time you put a check mark, you sort of like pause and you tell yourself that you just achieved something that you wanted to do. So you have this boost in motivation, right? And so you keep on doing that to help you in terms of gaining your confidence levels, right? So now you have the ability to do it, and you also feel good when you do it. So you sort of take a minute, you appreciate the fact that bi'idhnillah, you were able to accomplish this thing. So you consider it as an achievement that helps you then in terms of accumulating your motivation. And so do that strategically by uh, assigning yourself those tasks that are going to help you feeling good about yourself, right? So that's going to help you stay motivated and so on. So now the next step is frequent hard commitments. That means with penalties. So they did some research and they realized that soft commitments, the commitments that were sort of like not associated with the penalty, right? Then like in the long term, they were not as effective as the hard commitments where you had penalties associated with it. So whether that means that you lose something, whatever that might be, when you don't do something, they realize that hard commitments, the ones with penalties, were the ones that ended up being more effective in helping people achieve their goals. So this is why they decided that the hard commitments are the way to go, and not soft commitments where you don't, like, if you don't do it, you're like, okay, whatever and stuff, right? So keep in mind that hard commitments require you to set up your own like penalties. You can sit down with somebody and decide what those penalties could be, right? And then sort of like assign yourself and sort of commit yourself to those penalties and say, no matter what happens, I'm gonna lose this thing, whatever, if I don't do this, right? Whatever that thing is that you're gonna lose, it has to be something like, usually it has to be something tangible or something that has a lot of meaning associated with it, for you, right? So if something is very meaningful to you and you're gonna lose it, then you're gonna feel more defensive. And apparently there was more research done on like um, the like people feeling like when they lose something, or the fear of losing something drives people towards certain actions, right? So the fear of losing something, right, is a very strong motivator. So keep that in mind. Fear of losing something is a very strong motivator. Fear of losing something, especially that's meaningful to you, is a very strong motivator. If you feel like you're going to lose your freedom, you're really going to fight for it, right? And when you lose it, sometimes you feel like what you lost and stuff. You know how they say, appreciate something until you lose it. So that's something that that's, keep in mind that like if you have something very meaningful that you're holding on to, it's really dear to you, but then you sort of put that up for grabs, or sort of like up on the line, right? That if I don't do this, then I'm going to lose it. Then you're more likely to sort of like fight to keep it and stuff, so you don't lose it. So when it comes to freedom, for example, just as a general thing, people are really defensive in terms of freedom. They want their freedom, and as you saw in COVID-19, people who perceived wearing masks as like they consider them as muzzles. You can't put a muzzle on me and stuff, right? Like you can't make me like that dog or whatever and stuff, right? So this was that, like whoever perceived it like that they were losing their freedom, they became like rebellious against putting masks on. In the grand scheme of things, it didn't make sense because that wasn't the idea behind putting masks on. but the people who sort of misunderstood the entire idea, they perceived it as this idea of you're taking away my freedom and all this stuff, and I'm not going to let you do that. So they became like sort of like rebellious against that, so revolted against that. Um, and now another thing is moving away. Move from smaller goals to larger goals, and that's what we're talking about, building accumulation. Don't just approach a big task up front as a whole. Break it down into small chunks, right? Or in this context, have smaller goals before you go into bigger goals. Like I would rather say that I'm gonna achieve something in 1 month. Like let's say if I wanna like lose weight or gain muscle, for example, I might have like a 1 pound benchmark after a month, and I'll just focus on that, right? Then in the future, when I'm sort of able to kind of like sustain this, I might make it a bigger thing. So I might say, for example, now I want to focus on like, a 3 month plan of like, instead of 3 pounds, let's say 5 pounds and stuff, right? So I might push myself a little bit more. So kind of like go from something that, you can digest, something that you can sort of like, get sustainable with based on your current level. And then as your level goes higher and higher, right, and your motivation is already built up slowly, then you're going to be able to like sort of approach more difficult tasks. So start off with easier tasks, then you're going to be able to, over time, when you have more small achievements sort of accumulated, right, then you're going to feel more capable, you're going to feel more motivated to take on a bigger challenge, right? And that's what this means over here. So don't just start off with bigger challenges, start off with small ones, because you will get there, inshallah, be it that one day, to be able to address the bigger things, but don't just approach that from the very beginning. Like it took you some time before you were able to get to, let's say if you were doing algebra, for example, it took you some time to get there, right? You didn't start off from when you were like in kindergarten trying to approach calculus or algebra, whatever. You had to start off from learning what numbers mean. What is the concept behind numbers? What does it mean to have something that's 1 or 2 or 3 and stuff, right? What does that mean, right? And then you got transition eventually until when you got to algebra. Then you sort of like took a course. You're like, okay, let me try this course and stuff like that. I think it might be something, whatever that I want to do. So you sort of attempted that, but you didn't start off at the very beginning like that. So smaller goals before you address bigger ones. And then the step 4 is to connect goals to long-term outcomes. And that's what I would say, connecting something, connecting whatever you're doing to meaningful end results, right? Something meaningful to you. So if you have if you're really passionate about, for example, helping people in your community, right? Then make sure that whatever your goals are aligning to that, right? So how is whatever you're doing going to help you to that something meaningful? If you have if you have multiple things that are meaningful, find something that's relevant to whatever you're doing and sort of align it to that. If I'm, for example, attending this webinar over here, why am I attending this? How is that going to help me in something, right? So find something that is meaningful. And for example, it might be meaningful for you to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and maybe this is going to help you towards that, right? Taking steps towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in small steps, and then you take bigger steps as you go forward. Maybe this is helping you in terms of connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala better. So you attach this webinar to something meaningful. So something meaningful in this case being Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you're going to naturally go according to that. If it's a different situation, for example, let's say that you want to make a lot of money. So if you're doing something that's aligning towards that, then you're going to link it up and say, okay, well, this is going to help me. This is going to be one thing that's going to help me get towards my end goal, my end outcome of being rich, for example, right? And so you're gonna make that connection so that you're going to be able to keep that momentum going. And this is what we were talking about earlier, when you have purpose as one of the subcomponents of motivation. And now optimization is where this is the aspect of discipline that we're talking about. Is this constant there's this thing called experience sampling. So in the middle of your whatever regimen that you're following, that in the middle of it you're going to take like random samples of how you're feeling as you're doing something. So if let's say you're doing one of the goals and stuff, and you're taking certain steps to as part of that goal that you're trying to achieve, then in that case you sort of take random samples. Like you might have alert on your phone, or on your I don't know if you're using those smartwatches and stuff, right? And this alert pops up, and it's like, hey, how are you feeling, right? and then you sort of like take a note and say, I'm feeling motivated, I'm feeling really excited that I'm doing this thing. Or you might say like, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I don't think I can sustain this and stuff, right? So you do this as like random samples throughout the process of you accomplishing your goals and stuff. What that helps you is going back to constant feedback that we were talking about, like immediate feedback, but also like, constant feedback. The idea pretty much here is to make sure that you are able to um, optimize what you're doing and adjust as you need to, right? So this is part of discipline that we talked about before, that where is it, right here, that you're scientifically analyzing what you're doing to make sure that you're on task, and that you're actually progressing, and you're going to be able to sustain that, so you don't sort of like fall off and stuff, right? So this is experience sampling is a type of it's a method where you sort of analyze and sort of understand what's going on in your experience and stuff. So that's that. Now, the last few things I wanted to go over before we close, inshallah, is that the Prophet ﷺ, on the concept of sustainability is we know from the Prophet ﷺ that he mentioned that the most beloved deeds to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are those that are regular, constant deeds, consistent ones that you do, right? Adawamuha, the word da'iman, like like always and stuff, right? So the idea behind it is that the ones that are consistent, even if they're few. So it doesn't matter if they're few. The most important thing is that you do not take upon yourselves except the deeds which are within your ability. So this is whatever you're capable of doing, right? That's the important part over here. If you're not able to do this, then you're going to be in trouble. So with that, let me give you another version of this hadith. Again, Aisha is mentioning this. So the idea is stay in the middle path, right? And make sure that you're trying your best to maintain things. So he says, do not do good deeds properly, sincerely, and moderately, and know that your deeds will not make you enter into paradise, and that the most beloved deed to Allah is the most regular and constant, even if there were few, right? That's the important part over here. That as long as your deeds are sustainable, as in you're constantly doing them, then that's more beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And ahab over here is implying that they're more beloved, most beloved over here. This is like the superlative form of it, right? Ahab is like the superlative form of so the most beloved of actions are that. So okay. So then the next one is similar to that. By the way, notice over here, the Imam al-Bukhari, he wrote the chapter title, or the section title of this book as this right here. That's what he put this in here, right? And then he says what's the next one? Okay, and then this one is Imam Muslim. He's mentioning this, and he's saying the virtue of a deed that is done persistently, whether it be Qiyam al-Layl or anything else. So the command to be moderate in worship, which means adopting what one can persist in, and that's what we're talking about, sustainability. The command to the one who gets tired or weary when praying to stop until the feeling passes. In other words, when you feel overwhelmed, don't continue, because you're not going to be able to sustain that. And that's what we're talking about over here. Remember to do the things where it meets the minimum criteria, that you're not bored, but it also is not so challenging that you're sort of outside of your maximum range and stuff. So it's like in the middle, it's in the flow channel, between the minimum and maximum, so that you can continuously work on that action and so on. But if you sort of feel like you're getting out of it, you're too tired, you're too exhausted and stuff, and we know this from the hadith of Zainab radiallahu anha, when she used to have a rope and stuff she was kind of leaning on. So the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that she shouldn't do that. Do whatever you're capable of. Allah is not going to get tired of you giving your deeds. Allah is not going to get tired of giving you deeds, or like recording good deeds for you and stuff. Right? What's going to happen at the end that you're going to get tired. So don't do that, because you might do like one exhaustive effort and stuff, and then after that you sort of like just kind of fall off of that deed for many days, many months or whatever and stuff, and then you don't come back to it. So if you're praying at night 2 rakat, do that, right? If you can maintain that. If you can pray like at night Qiyamul Layl 5 minutes or 2 minutes, do 2 minutes and that's it. Don't think that you need to do 5 minutes or whatever. Instead, do 2 minutes and that is it, because you're able to maintain that, and that's more beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than if you prayed 5 minutes. So the small t truth is that you think that it's more beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you do 5 minutes one day and then you sort of drop off, right? But in fact, that's not the capital T truth. Your perception of capital T truth was wrong. The reality is, we're learning the reality here, that the most beloved are the ones that are consistent and constant, right? So make sure that you align yourself to the capital T truth when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when it comes to rewards and stuff like that. Some people believe that you can speak to the dead, for example, and stuff. That's their perception. That's their lower care perspective. And so they sort of get confused when they're trying to communicate and stuff and all that. But we know that that doesn't happen. If anything, the mediums that the people who are called mediums, when they try to channel the jinn or whatever and stuff, they make it seem like they're actually talking to like the person who is the client is actually talking to their ancestor or somebody who passed away before them or whatever. But in reality, that's not what's happening. The jinn are communicating with each other and stuff, and they're like, they know what the person is thinking and what they were expecting as an answer. So the person, the jinn sort of like communicate with each other, and then they mention that to the medium, and then the medium mentions it out to the people. So we know that that's the capital T truth. But the people who don't know this, they think that this is what's happening. They're communicating with the dead ones and so on. So understanding capital T truth is going to help you, so you can align your small t truth. You can adjust and modify. This is again concept of feedback and stuff we were talking about, adjusting and modifying, right? So that you're always on track, as opposed to sort of like going in the wrong direction because you thought that your reality was the right reality when it didn't actually match with the actual reality. So constant is better, even if it's small, compared to big ones that you're gonna sort of fall off on, or you're gonna get overwhelmed in. And then this one right here is again, this is it's the same hadith but in like a longer format, and it says do. So this is talking about the Prophet ﷺ used to do this, right? But then he said, do as much of good deeds as you can, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not get tired until you get tired. As in, Allah's not gonna get tired of this. And this until over here is not to say that Allah's getting tired, it's to say that you are gonna get tired, and that's where you're gonna get your deeds. You're stopped in a sense of like, where you're only gonna get reward for what you do. But if you got tired, you're not gonna be doing it, so you're not gonna get reward for that, right? And then the most beloved of deeds to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are those that are continuous, even if they are few. And then that's it. So then he stopped that prayer and he didn't do it. Now notice in the previous hadith over here. Go back. Okay, this one says Aisha used to, if she said anything, she would do it consistently. So the Sahaba had this practice: if they started something, they wouldn't stop it, right? They would continue this until they died. And the Prophet ﷺ did the same thing over here. If he started to do something, he would persist in it. So that's where they learned it, and that's what they used to do constantly. So with that, the main things are sustainability requires you to break things down to something that you can digest every single day, or every single step, whatever, and continue maintaining that. And that's it. If you feel like it's too overwhelming, break it down into more chunks and stuff, or break it down to make it easier. And it's okay, because you want to get to the end goal. If you can't run all the way there, then jog all the way there, and if you can't jog all the way there, then walk all the way there. It's no problem. You're still going to get there, inshallah, at the end of the day, right? And even if you don't get to the full 100%, you're still going to get there 90%, 80%, and that's better than doing a 10-minute thing, or like a 10% thing and sort of giving up, right? So the idea of the hare and the tortoise, that the rabbit was like running and stuff like that, and the turtle was just kind of like just taking his time and stuff, but he got to the end because the rabbit sort of kind of burnt out. He's like, okay, let me just take a nap or whatever, and then the turtle just kind of just continue to move forward. That's it. So make sure you can maintain the course. You don't have to get there all at once. And then the steps going forward. So what do you do now? How do you do this? How do you apply this in your life? How do you reframe everything that we talked about? How do you navigate your life? How do you go pretty much never become stuck, never become overwhelmed, never become stressed, never become worried and stuff? How does that happen, right? So that's what you guys are going to do. That's your homework, inshallah. And I think with this, we're going to stop this series, and we're going to rebrand it, because remember I said we're going to do that. We're going to do something different, but that's what we're doing over here. We're reframing this series, and that's what I mean by rebranding, right? And that's what marketers do and stuff when it comes to different brands and stuff like that. That's how the economy works. That's how markets work. That's how the world works and stuff. When something isn't going the right way, then they they sort of rebrand or reframe it, so it makes it a little bit easier for people to sort of adapt and adjust to it and stuff, right? Or for the company to adapt and adjust to the changing times and so on, right? Or the changing demands and so on. So that's what we're doing over here, because I want that to be like an example of what you can do yourselves, right? So we're going to rebrand this, we're going to reframe it so that you look at struggles as not struggles, but more as like an opportunity for growth. That's a challenge that you're sort of accepting, like challenge accepted, right? As opposed to here's another struggle that I have to sort of like go through and stuff, right? Now you're sort of looking at it as here's a challenge that I'm accepting, I'm choosing to accept it, and I'm going to keep moving forward in it until I get to the goals that I have set in mind. And this is the idea of going from traditional psychology to positive psychology, which focuses on strengths as opposed to the weaknesses that we have, okay? So it goes by looking at traditional psychology, looks at how far below the baseline that you're going, right? And then sort of like telling you to go back to the baseline, okay, like going up, 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 up until you get to the baseline again. Whereas positive psychology is saying that you have, you sort of have some measures, some of your components of who you are and stuff have gone above the baseline, and some of them are still near the baseline, but still above it, right? So some of them have sort of gone to like level 15, but some of your other strengths have like still stayed at like, let's say level 2 or 3 or whatever, and so you can continue working on them and make them stronger strengths, and then you can become optimized and stuff like that. So they say that the difficulties that you're having is not because you're sort of regressing and going below the baseline, but they say that you haven't really worked enough on some of the things that can become your strengths, so you can work on them and help them go upwards and stuff. So with that, that's the end of our session today, inshallah, and I hope that it has been beneficial. Inshallah, we're going to rebrand this, and we're going to reframe this entire thing, and so the next flyers that are going to go out, it's going to be the same thing but more applied version of this. How do you apply this in your life, and kind of like giving you examples and case studies, and inshallah. But in the meantime, if you guys have any questions or comments or suggestions and feedback, then you can reach out, inshallah. You can mention now, you can also send an email, and then we'll get the feedback, inshallah. Let's see if we can maybe I can send an email where you can mention like like an anonymous thing, whatever, for tips and feedback, so we can look into that, inshallah, as well.
Assalamu alaikum. Can I ask a question real quick?
Yes. Can
you hear me? Okay. So you were talking about like not pushing yourself hard enough or too hard, or you'll become old.
Are you driving?
But a little bit more. Like it's hard to tell when you actually reach that limit. I guess until like by the time you reach that limit, it's too late, because then you just like you are overwhelmed and you lose motivation. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So in this case, what you can do is to start out, if it's a habit, it's something that happens consistently, then just sort of tell yourself that I've over time, however many times I've tried this, it's not working out. I sort of like I get overwhelmed. So let me in the next thing that I do, let me just kind of step it down a few notches, okay? And if it becomes too easy, no problem. I can always up it, right? But I'm not going to lose motivation necessarily as quickly if I was like compared to if I was overwhelmed. So if you know that this is a habit, it's a recurring thing, then you can sort of like tell yourself, okay, I know that I'm about to do this, and this is sort of seeming like how I normally do things, but I know that gets me overwhelmed. So let me not push myself that far out. Let me sort of like take a few steps, fewer steps than I normally would, and that's okay. And if you feel like, oh man, I just took too few steps compared to how many I could have, don't blame yourself. Tell yourself, okay, but I'm not gonna go back to the level that I normally do at. Maybe I can take an extra step, but not so many that I go back to how many I normally do. So, but this is again a constant feedback loop. In engineering, there's a constant feedback loop and controls. So that's what you can do over here. So pretty much like assess yourself as you're going forward. If you feel like this is something that's gonna overwhelm you, okay, maybe it overwhelmed you the first day. Tell yourself the next day I'm gonna take a few fewer steps. That's okay. So the next day, take fewer steps. And if you feel like that's just way too few, no problem. Try it a few days. Let's say 2-3 days and stuff. And if you still feel like that's too few, and you're feeling like this is just I'm not, it's too little, no problem. Then maybe you can add one more step, and that's it. Okay, but don't go like really quickly back to the norm that you had. Is that
Okay.
it?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Other questions? Okay, so if there's no questions, inshallah, we will go ahead and conclude. And سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.